lot going on today, and we're very grateful that you're spending your time with us. We have a lot going on here, so if you can hang for the afternoon, that would be great. After the talk, we'll tell you what's going on. I'd like to introduce our artists and our moderator today. We've got Martine Kaczynski, Adam Liam Rose, and Joan Grubin. Adam's show is in the drawing room, and Martine's show is right here, and Joan's show is to be determined. Martine Kaczynski has been living in New York since she left London in the early 90s and has been exhibiting and teaching since her MFA from Parsons School of Design in 1993. Frequently, she develops work on private property that has been awarded to her by various patrons. Her large-scale projects have been exhibited in numerous venues, including Socrates Sculpture Park in New York City, Turchin Center in North Carolina, the Light Park Syracuse, Rural Projects Gallatin, New York, Art Austerlitz, yay, and the Millay Art Center in Austerlitz, New York. She was a NIFA Fellow in 1997 and has been awarded grants from the Artist Fellowship, the Haven Foundation, and the Pat Hearn and Colin DeLand Foundation between 2011 and 2013. She has also been nominated twice for the Rima Horn Foundation in 2008 and 2009. She has been an artist in residence at Skowhegan School of Art, Triangle Artist Residency in Brooklyn, New York, Rural Projects in Gallatin, New York, and is currently at the Arts and Letters Numbers in Residence in Avro Park, New York. Besides teaching at Pratt College for 15 years, she has taught sculpture and drawing at Parsons School of Design, Rutgers College, SUNY Purchase Bard College, and Cornell University in the Architecture and Planning Department. Thank you, Martine. Adam Liam Rose, who is showing in our drawing room. If you haven't been there, it's right around the corner. Born 1990, is an interdisciplinary artist working across sculpture, installation, video, and drawing. Born in Jerusalem, raised mostly in the United States, his works investigate the aesthetic systems of power embedded within architecture. Rose received a BFA from the School of Art Institute in Chicago and an MFA from Columbia University School of the Arts. He was a fellow at the Bronx Museum of Art's AIM program in 2018, the Drawing Center's Viewing program in 2021, and the Art and Law program in 2018. Rose was awarded the artist residencies at Triangle Arts Association in 2019, Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts as both a resident artist 2018 and alumni resident 2021. Oxbow School of Art 2017, A to Z West Institute of Investigative Living 2016, the Vermont Studio Center, and the Chicago Arts Coalition Hatch Residency 2013-2014. He held solo exhibitions at the Java Project and Ortega y Gasset projects. Rose participated in Here Art Center and Quappy projects, amongst others. His publication, Between the Bars, Gender Failed Press 2021, is in the Artist Book Collection of the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, Pratt Institute, and the Frick Fine Arts Library in Pittsburgh. Rose joined as co-director at Artist Run Gallery Ortega y Gasset projects in 2019. He lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. Our moderator today, Joan Grubin, is a visual artist based in New York City and the upstate Hudson River Valley. Her dimensional objects and installations created in paper are characterized by formal rigor, upended by a sense of whimsy, and are rooted in process, play, and the qualities intrinsic to paper. Grubin has shown her work in solo and group exhibitions nationally and internationally in galleries, nonprofit spaces, and museums, including the New York Public Library, the Parrish Art Museum, the Weatherspoon Museum, and the University of Maine, the Kentler International Drawing Space, and the Atelier LA in Sao Paulo, Brazil. She was awarded a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in 2008 and has had residencies at McDowell, Mass MoCA, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. On occasion, Grubin has written reviews for the Brooklyn Rail, Hyperallergic, and has curated exhibitions. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to hand it over to Joan to get started.
Everybody hear me? Okay, great. Ryan, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here today with these two amazing artists and to have a chance to create a platform for them to tell you what they do. It's interesting, when I was asked to moderate this conversation, I had this kind of new habit of thinking about words and what they really mean, and I thought about the word moderate and what it really means. And I looked it up, and the definition one of the definitions I found was to make or become less extreme, intense, rigorous, or violent. So I just wanted you to know that there are some ground rules. We don't want any violence here. No throwing anything. But we do want intensity and we do want rigor. But we're not going to try to make it too hard. Anyway, I thought I would start by just asking the two of you why you became artists. Not so much how, but why. And it's not really a particularly reasonable or rational thing to do. It's the kind of thing that gets parents often very worried about how you're going to sustain yourself. And so I wondered how you both came to this path. And Adam, you're holding the mic. Do you want to?
Sure.
Go first?
Why I became an artist. I think I was kind of creative my whole life. My mom really recognized that as a young child, and she enrolled me very young into oil painting classes. And I think really I became an artist when I went to grad school. I was always creative, but in undergrad, I went in for graphic design initially, and I took one class, and I said, oh no, this was not for me. And at the same time, I was taking all these creative classes. This was at the School of the Art Institute. And yeah, after that one graphic design class, I was like, I think it's not feeding me and like the questions that I want to kind of explore in my life. And it's, yeah, I don't know if that's a great answer. It's kind of boring, I think.
Well,
but,
it sounds like you have very understanding parents and sensitive to their children.
yeah, I mean, my mom, the reason I started graphic design was my mom was like, well, try to do something practical, you know, like make the money. But she sent me to a school at CIC that was very much about like, well, maybe try to explore every freaking art making medium that you can, which I definitely did. And yeah,
That's great.
I was very moldable at the time.
Yeah, that's good. So you got
That's
an
great, yeah.
early start. What about you, Martine? What was your?
Hi, can you hear me? I guess I was really lucky. I had a family that were all learners, they were all hat makers. And so everybody was always making things with their hands in my house. You'd go to other people's houses and they were readers. You know, some houses you'd go in, everybody was very quiet and they would be reading newspapers and books. And in my house it was the opposite. It was very chaotic. Everyone was making things all the time. My father was a maker, my grandmother was a sewer, my mother, all the family were makers. So, and my father's love for art, fine art, was evident in how he made us go to all the openings and shows and would take us traveling. And we saw an awful lot as a child of monuments and temples. And I was in the pyramids at 14. And I was in, China in my 20s, seeing Xi'an warriors, and there was this sort of passion for art that was just in the household. And so when it came to me, I was always drawing. I was drawing ever since I could remember. And I think that when it came to the decision of, it's funny that you had talked about the graphic versus the non-graphic. So I had the opposite. I was thinking that I would actually go into industrial design, and my father was furious, absolutely furious. How could you do that? You're a fine artist, you need to go into the fine arts. And there was this dilemma, because I really liked design, I really liked sort of how things are constructed, and I ended up doing fine art eventually and started doing sculpture from them. So it was also in my memories of thinking the significance of things started happening also, I think, around when I was like 6. And I remember sort of going on one of these crazy trips with my parents, and I was up Mount Etna, and there was this line of string that was dividing this crater, and just this string was the only barrier between where I was and sort of this immediate death. And it really was profound for me, and I just remember the importance of line and what that string meant. And I've always drawn line, and I wonder if it comes from these kind of very strange memories of that. And I see it in a lot of my work still, the importance of line. So we would always have art in the house, and I think that I was incredibly fortunate for that. It wasn't like you need to go and get a job. It was more like you need to sort of you need to work really, really hard. There was a big work ethic, and you need to carry that work ethic into the studio. So he was quite determined in a weird way for me to be an artist. I think maybe he was a frustrated artist himself and never got fulfilled because he had a family, and I ended up sort of doing the thing that he wanted. But I fell in love with it anyway. So that's how it started.
Well, I think I maybe made the wrong assumption about parents standing in the way and just feeling, I mean, there are probably a lot of artists in the audience here who have to kind of claw their way to becoming an artist. So that's, you're fortunate. That's really wonderful. I did have a question about, just to start to get into the work, about the relationship that both of you have between drawing and architecture. And Adam, I know your work that you have on view here is all drawing.
Yeah.
But I know from what I've seen on your website, I'm afraid I haven't seen your other work in person, but there's a lot of architectural constructions and references.
Absolutely.
And I'm very interested in why architecture is sort of a vocabulary that both of you have chosen to express yourself through.
So there's two questions. One's about architecture and one's about
The
drawing.
relationship between, I know it's kind of a two-part question,
Yeah.
the relationship between the drawings that you do and the architectural sculpture.
I think architectural interest has really stayed with me through my life. I grew up in Jerusalem in the 1990s, a very tumultuous time, and I lived in East Jerusalem, which, yeah, if you know, you know, overlooking a Palestinian refugee camp. Sorry, I have a little bit of a sore throat, so I'm struggling here, but it was overlooking a Palestinian refugee camp, and I remember kind of that lines, kind of imaginary barrier between my house and that refugee camp. So it was really a valley at the time. And then I left Israel in 2002 and returned in 2012 to see the Israeli separation barrier now, like a concrete line drawing. And I think that just architecture and the way like the way that space is built in Israel is kind of ingrained in you as a child. Is how you move around the world. It's how you separate yourself from others. I mean, we have that here in the United States as well, which some of my work has kind of delved into recently, but that's kind of where the architectural interest came. And I think like moving to the US gave me the distance to see how much power it held over me. So I sort of been building these architectures based off of architectural sculptures, based off of power architectures, power structures, thinking about the way that bodies are mediated or moved or operated in space. And I've always made drawings alongside. They were very sketchy, very rough. And friends of mine have liked them for a long time and would say like you should really try to draw more. And then in 2019, I did a residency that you also did, Triangle Arts, Triangle, which is in Dumbo. And a friend of mine came to my studio and she was like, "These are great, why don't you like draw every day?" And so I took it as a kind of challenge and I started drawing every day. And at the time I was looking at these manuals that the US government released in the 1950s showing American families how to build a fallout shelter at home. And I was really interested in that kind of promise, and that's a word that comes up in my work a lot recently, is promise through space, through visual language, through aesthetics, and how promise can numb a population into complacency, often through architecture and mediation of bodies. So I was looking at this manual, and I kind of took that as the first step, first inspiration to start drawing. And I initially just kind of copied these fallout shelter structures, eliminating bodies from them and really just thinking about them as bodies themselves. And that's how it started. I could say more, but I feel like we should leave room. But I don't know.
No, that's great, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like now, and I think a lot about the surface. So it's like the relationship between the drawing surface, the surface of concrete, we were just talking about, and what it does to your senses, and what kind of feelings of safety or non-safety you might be getting. Yeah, maybe you can take.
So that's, it's nice to hear you talk about that, because we have I think, a mutual understanding of that instinctively, even though we have not really met and discussed our work. There's a lot of crossovers, and one of them definitely is this relationship between architecture and how he uses it and how I use it, even though it comes out differently. The root is often quite similar. And for me, I really am looking at architecture not like I want to be an architect. I don't want to be an architect. It's got nothing to do with that. It's to do with the power that it holds, and it's to do with the implications of how civic architecture is used, like medians or like a car space, or how we navigate through our environment with obedience without even questioning what that is and what that means. And so that's really important. I think that you can understand that as well, because we are definitely coming from that place of, well, what are these walls that we put up in our cities? You know, how does it divide the people, and how does it divide a space? And so I am aligned with you in that questioning. And for me, I started looking at architecture and the uncanny. And the uncanny often is sort of explained in Freud's term as something which is like the unheimlich, which literally means not homely. And when it comes out, it's where these things that should offer you protection, should offer you security, actually become the reverse of that. And they're actually become issues of unstable, insecurity, anxiety, and promote feelings of anxiety in our everyday things. And that happens on the side of the road, or it happens, on the edge of a building. I don't necessarily look at the entire building, but I often look at the additions of the buildings. For example, the patio or the garden, or something that goes around the building itself, or the canopies, or a balcony. And it's not necessarily the entire thing. I'm almost separating these little components that I get fascinated with, where they hold this promise, as you said, of luxury or promise of security, and they become the opposite. They're actually, and that's where the uncanny comes from with the architecture. So, and when it comes to drawing, because I think it's two separate questions, so I'll ask the other question now. With drawing, I've always drawn, and I've often drawn just, with line, and that, as I said, that line comes out a lot in the sculpture, whether it's a linear structure that has lines on it, or it's the line of the railings on a piece, or even the silhouette or outline of the fences. I draw, and as I'm drawing, I'm already in my head trying to figure out how I would make that thing. And I often draw things that have this idea of the means and markers of settlement. So when something is, for example, a canopy, which should sort of provide a shelter and has this history of the most nomadic way of life, versus the fences, which hark back to the most fortress way of life. This dissettlement or displacement is what I'm most interested in. So when I draw, I'm always drawing things that are around home or facilitate place or displacement. And then when I'm actually making the work, there's also another kind of bunch of drawings that I do, or where I'm actually trying to figure out how to fabricate the work. And so then diagrams come in. I start utilizing things that I've had to draw in a vector on a computer, which is a whole nother set of modes of representation that I've had to adopt to get things fabricated in some of these shows. And I thought, well, why am I actually using these really interesting diagrammatic drawings and bringing them into the mix of representation, and what do they do? So it's also like a breakdown of language with the drawing that I'm interested in that's coming out in this work.
Yeah, that's great. And you've talked a lot about control too, and architecture that you don't really notice, but that is, and this is true for you too, Adam, that sort of it's articulating where we should move and how we should move, and they're not things that we necessarily notice. And so you've talked about reenacting, what is the expression?
I reenact and recreate insignificant things that become then, I think, significant.
Yeah, things that we don't notice, but that are actually controlling our movements.
Yeah.
And that seems very
well. It's very powerful if you've got people who are obedient and they don't realize that they're being obedient, right? So architecture has the power to do that.
So this leads me, when you talk about obedience and we're talking about control and the power of architecture, to wanting to ask you a little bit about how you see your own personal stories as being important for viewers to know in order to understand your work, and how you think about your biography. Do you want the work to be seen free of that, and then perhaps a viewer becomes interested and they learn something about you, and then that gives a whole other understanding of what you do? Or is that really just right up front part of the mix that you want people to know?
You know, I find that often it's interesting when people don't know at first, just because they engage in a very ornamental sort of response, that wow, that's so beautiful, or the texture is so whatever, or how did you make whatever, you know, it's like these generic ooh ah, which are great, and I love those comments. And then there's like a aha moment that I think is more interesting to me, and kind of replicates what power does in architecture, of like figuring out the story behind something, the history of something. You're doing work beyond what you're seeing. That's kind of the work of art, ultimately, in my opinion. So, in terms of my own personal history, I mean, it's important to me in the making. It's why I make. It's where I come from. It's my feelings and emotions, and which are coming more and more into the work that you might see over time, because it started very architectural and now it's becoming a lot more kind of psychedelic and emotional and based on feelings.
So it may have started more politically with maybe your connection to Israel and
power, and now I think it's more about like my personal relationship to safety and like where my body feels. I've been thinking about that kind of disconnect between architecture and the body, and when do you actually feel safe, and when someone says to you, oh, we're in a safe space, that automatically puts you in a like defensive situation. So you're automatically responding to danger. So I kind of wonder about that psychological space. But to return to your question, I think it's nice for people to find out eventually. I don't know about
as a process,
as an unfolding, because it does add depth to the work, for sure.
I agree, basically. I would say exactly the same thing. I love it when people come they see the work, they don't really know anything about me, and I want them to have an experience. I want them to have an optical experience or a physical experience. These are sculptures, they're large scale, they relate to your body, and the ultimate, or the first layer of the onion, so to speak, should be one of engagement, regardless of what they know about me. I really never really spoke about the Holocaust or coming from that arena or history until only recently. And I was always very tentative about bringing that on board. Who wants to talk about genocide? Nobody. It's a very difficult subject to wrap your head around, and it's a very hard pill to swallow. But if you're a child of that atrocity, you kind of swallow that pill every day, regardless. You don't even realize that you're doing it until you step out of your community and you look at other people and you're like, oh, they don't have that pill? Oh, okay. And so, yes, it's in you. Is it the first thing you want to talk about? No. Do the work address it? It does. It's the residue of that history that I deal with, which is why I'm so interested in history and the origin of an object, and then how that moves from the origin into something else, because I am not the first, but I'm sort of in the history of the Holocaust, probably first or second generation out. So I have this relationship with history from that perspective. And I do end up talking about it. Usually I talk about it solo. I don't necessarily talk about it publicly. And I agree with Adam, it's the core of some of my work. Most of my work comes from a particular psyche from my own personal history, but I don't want, it's not like I want people to sort of think about that as soon as they see the work. I don't. And it's like a person. You know, you want to get to know people, and the more you get to know a person and the more you understand the depth of the person, it comes out in layers later. And that slow information, that stillness that happens between information and then gathering information is also a big part of art making. You don't want to give everybody everything all at once, because then where's the artistry in that? That's just like a billboard. And I'm much more interested in slowing things down and getting people to sort of think, and then revealing things slower to in the sculpture, in the drawings, and with the history.
And just to that point, I think letting people kind of read it on their own lets them bring their own baggage to it too that you might not have seen. So people have looked at my work before and like found things that I never even imagined, and I think that kind of expands my understanding from my own work for myself.
Of what it is that you do.
Yeah, and like how it might read differently to someone else.
Yeah. I do feel, well, with both of you, Martine, this work feels, it feels, it's very quiet, but I think there's this feeling of what is going on here, like what are you saying? And I feel a tremendous feeling of melancholy about the work, and just some kind of, there is a sadness in a very poetic way of some feeling of something. Well, different works are different. Like this feels like something happened, and you're not sure what, but whatever it is, it went awry.
It did definitely go awry.
It did go awry, and yeah, the strange stairs over there that you can't really walk up, with the railing that you can't really
Another promise.
support you, and a hose which is
Doesn't work.
not doing anything.
Doesn't function.
No.
It looks like it does though.
But then there's sort of an oracular piece over there, that large ziggurat.
The ziggurat, the upside down water trough.
The water trough, yeah. Which anyway, it does have a kind of almost a mystical feeling about it, like you look into it and try to read the future or something. That feels like a very poetic piece. So there's range, and Adam, I think you too, there's some different ways of reading the work. So it's true, without knowing your relationship to the wall, there's shelter and safety, there's a kind of visionary quality to some of it. some sense of something happening that you don't know what it is. But both of you, I think, really go to the heart of things. I did want to ask and comment on, and see what you have to say about the fact that there's just an extraordinary amount of labor involved in making, both of you, making this work. Just really unbelievable pains have been taken, in your case, Martine, to make the work look sort of almost invisible, like you could walk by it and even not notice it. The fact that it's in a gallery and it's, taking up a lot of space makes you really notice it. But it's a comment on things that we walk by all the time that we never look at, and yet are determining things about our lives. So it's incredibly moving, the idea of putting so much labor into work that is so quiet and almost trying to be anonymous, and yet is a little bit strange. And Adam, I think you too, you just use it on a macro level, just incredible detailed craft that looks like it's very challenging in terms of just like carpal tunnel and
Tell me about it.
yeah, I bet. And even your eyes, just that can't be good for you.
It's not great.
So how does that? What I want to know, I think, is how the intensity of the labor relates to the meaning of the work. Like, is it part of the meaning, would you say?
I feel like it's shifted back and forth for me. I don't know anymore, because I feel like the labor's become pretty intense in becoming, like, as I make these drawings more and more and more and more, my body is changing, and I'm getting older, and the carpal tunnel is real, and I don't know that I believe in, like, artists suffering for work so much. I do enjoy the effect of it, and, like, the granular detailing, and frankly, I don't really know how to work any other way. It's kind of just how I've always done it. Conceptually, I'm really interested in it as like a micro-macro kind of expansion or focus in, or for me, it's always about that kind of relationship to the body, and, like, again, the surface is very important to me. But in terms of enjoyment, I enjoy it, and then I don't enjoy it. And I think that's labor, and I think it's...
That is another question I wanted to ask, and you could sort of embed this as well, and how you talk about this is, where is there pleasure involved in making this work? Because I just happen to know a little bit about the labor involved, and it seems there has to be some pleasure somewhere, or you wouldn't do it. It can't all be torture, but so where is it at the end when you see the result in it? There's something very satisfying about that, or in the materiality itself. Because I think for a lot of artists, there's real pleasure in manipulating materials, and there's the playful element of playing with materials and working with color, and there's a sensuous aspect to it. With both of you, it feels like you work for tough taskmasters who, your boss, which is yourself, is kind of runs a pretty tight ship.
I would say for me, the pleasure comes in discovery, like you were saying. I think it's not so much in the labor and the time and the focused energy that I constantly give to these drawings, but I think it's when I do it for so long and then I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I could do it this way, or it's creating a new effect, and then of course also in the completion of it, I'm finally satisfied, or I see it's never quite the vision of what I thought it was going to be, which is also kind of exciting.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have any.
Yeah. So there's labor and then there's process. Those are two different things. So the labor is just, your
Execution.
Execution. Labor is awful. I'm sure anyone says. It's exhausting. what I go for is the end result. I know very clearly in my head, not necessarily the vision of what something should look like, but the feeling of that vision, the feeling that that vision needs to be. And that is a driving force, and it doesn't matter if it has to take me 6 months to get there. It's almost like an alcoholic who just needs that drink. They've got to get to a point where you feel like you've hit the coin, so to speak. And so there is an addiction that goes on with the kind of labor. That has to take place until you kind of reach,
If the addiction is to feel that feeling,
Yeah.
you feel when the thing clicks.
Yes, when it clicks. And that clicking, for me, is when the polarities, almost like psychological color contrasts, come together. So if you think of color and you think of red and green, there's your contrast and that. Well, for me, it's sort of a psychological contrast of complementaries that have to come together and click. It's almost like jigsaw puzzles, and you just have to get it, and that's the driving force. And it's and process is for me really important. I don't usually do many processes again and again. Some people mine the same thing. I don't. I've got to learn how to do design work, cast cement, work with rubber, do milling. It's about the amount of materials and skills involved are exhausting and exciting. And you have to learn things all over again. It's not like one thing is done and then you just repeat it. So that's, the process and the joy of understanding materials and how materials can work. But also at the end of the day, you've got to sort of realize you have to choose what it is that you're actually talking about. Why are you doing this rather than something else? In other words, I remake things that already exist. So the question really is, why aren't you just making found objects? And the answer to that is because I'm not interested in Duchampian theory. I'm not interested in Joseph Boisier theory, which is material as metaphor. I'm interested in something else, which is simulacra. I'm interested in what it is to copy something and then have it move from its origin into its own existence. That's a very different line of thinking, and because of that, I have to make the damn things myself, or it has to come from scratch. And during that process, you are reconstructing a sense of nostalgia, and it's like a homesickness, but it's not homesickness. So the understanding of the like in that sentence is really, really important to me. And the reconstructed version of nostalgia isn't necessarily nostalgia, it's trying to figure out the signs and signifiers of such. And therefore, the process is really fundamental to what I'm doing. It can't be a found object. It can't be me getting a found object and then cutting it up, changing it, reselling it. It can't be like that. Because that already comes with its own baggage. Found objects come with all of that.
Right.
So the labor is necessary, but it is definitely not enjoyable.
I didn't think so.
It's the end result I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
And it's the equations that happen and the mechanics of making sculpture that are vastly expansive when you have to make all the decisions from beginning to end. That is an incredible mathematical, artistic journey that happens that I'm absolutely drawn to. And there's the interest to me. It's how your thoughts are formed, formulated, and constructed. And how do you get that into the object?
But I think what you add in addition to that is the idea of, in the end, this thing that you've worked so hard to reconstruct, you also want it almost not to be seen.
Absolutely.
So
because there's more. I tell you, the most powerful man in the room is not the one that's speaking. Right? It's the one that you can't hear. The one that, do you know what I mean? It's for me anyway. To be invisible actually has its own power. So I think things that are discarded and are familiar and we just walk by them, they sometimes have got things that we don't realise how powerful our everyday objects are. They inform us, they form who we are. They are reflections of our culture and our history. And they have baggage of their own because we, as humans, design them. So I'm very, very drawn to all of those things.
Yeah, it really does engage the viewer, I think, to say, what is this and why?
Right.
And it draws you in that way.
And I do look for stillness and silence. I definitely do. It's like there's so much chaos in my head, emotionally or whatever, and out there, that I want to make something and sort of quiet it down, still it. What happens if it's just a moment in time that you've frozen and you've drawn time, you've expanded that one moment, and so you can really look at it, so you can really absorb it and understand it. And some of these pieces they really do actually come from moments that I've had out in the world. They're not just made up moments, they're actual physical moments that I've had, that I've been like an existential experience have happened, at the back of Antwerp. When, I saw sort of an upside down water trough in the pissing rain collecting water in its arse. And I was just like, fucking hell, it's amazing. It looks beautiful, it's beautiful, it has its own beauty and its own magnificent sort of sense of simplicity and absurdity. And
Brian, how are we doing on time?
We're good. It's like 5 minutes and let's open up for questions.
Okay, so I think, let me see here. I think I'd like to just go to this very last one, and I think you probably both touched on it a little bit, but this question comes from a poet who we heard him give a talk. This was W.S. Merwin, and it was a question that he would ask to someone who was struggling with their, like an aspiring poet who was writing, and he could see that it was his son actually who was venturing into poetry, which would be a pretty intimidating thing to do if you were the son of W.S. Merwin. And he said to his son, he said, "What are you listening for?" And I just love that question because I think it's something. I use that in my own work. Just what are you after here? And that's what I wanted to ask both of you. It's a hard thing to answer, and it's because you're really talking about what's ineffable, and it's hard to put into words. But if you just wanted to have a go at it.
Sure. What do I listen for? I think for me, it's really a moment in the middle between tension and calmness. Like a kind of calm and then a tension before. And I don't know what that is. Kind of in between. And I don't know how to elaborate on that so much, but I think
that's great.
I think it's kind of how I've lived my life. Growing up in Israel and being the only queer boy in my family, and leaving that space and reflecting back on it, and I think it's really always been about, for me personally, in my own life, trying to find a kind of calm balance. Mm-hmm. And those moments of tension that actually kind of help propel you forward. I think if you can locate those moments of tension, you can kind of ease things.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I see that in your work. There's something happening. There's like kind of visionary moments in many of those drawings, which I hope everybody has a chance to go see if you haven't already. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, I don't have much.
It's funny, that's a kind of very similar to how I would feel when things work. It is these polarities of dissidence or whatever that somehow manage to find a place of quiet ease, even when they are at ill ease, if you see. So it's sort of a tone. It's a strong tone, but it's not shouting. But it's when the tension, it's sort of a place between sort of a quiet somber. I think there is a sense of melancholy that I want in the work that carries for me the weight of my history, but at the same time, you know, recognizes that that's not all there is. You know.
So there's humor, I think.
Yeah,
also.
there is humor, for sure.
More, maybe more like wit, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with
It's
that.
not ha-ha, but.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Well, maybe that's a good point to open it up. What do you think? I invite anyone who has a question. I see that hand back there. Is that Jean?
Yep. I would love to hear Martine talk about her decisions about scale and her work.
I definitely look at the real world. It has to feel as though it could exist. It's not a model, but it is its own entity, so it has to architecturally feel that it's right in relationship to the real. So the proportions and the scale of things always have that relationship. I don't usually make things that are small because that talks about something completely different. And so yeah, it's really almost one-to-one.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. You were talking about that moment when you see and feel something in the world, and I wondered whether they mimicked the scale of things
Yes,
you did.
they do.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah, but then you tweak it.
I tweak.
Not perfectly
I
so
tweak
that
it.
I look at it.
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah.
There's the
it's-
power for
Yeah.
me.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
definitely right.
You know, and you'll notice those little details. I'm not taking up, so, but
No,
that's an important, scale is huge in your work. And in the drawings, these are not scale. Like they're just, everything's a little tweaked, and then that's why we notice them again.
Okay.
Yeah. And smart is the word I would use for both of their work.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, go. There's another
I see a
question.
hand.
I have a question.
Yes.
About 2 years ago in the New York Times, one of the better-known critics was talking about the difference between painting and sculpture. And she was really struggling with this. And her conclusion, which I've always resonated about, is that sculpture is anything three-dimensional. And I don't agree. And I wonder if you don't agree.
A professor, Dennis Adams, one actually told me this. He said, sculpture's got a back and a front. That's all it needs. And I kind of, every so often, when I make things, kind of understand that. And it's in our physical presence in the world, but it doesn't necessarily need to be three-dimensional in those traditional terms. And I also think sculpture, if you open up even wider, sculpture really is about thought. It's about thinking.
Really about
Thinking, it's about thought.
thought. Okay. I like that better.
You don't take an orange and just use the color as the orange. The orange is a thing. And so there's a thought process that happens in sculpture that doesn't always happen in two-dimensional stuff.
Good.
And I think a painting can be a sculpture, and a sculpture can be a painting, depending on how you look at it, or how you present it. And I had a sculpture made a while ago in grad school that my good friend Dana might know, that was a point perspective art scale structure, but I also think of it as a painting because I made it on wooden panels, but it's in space. So I think it kind of depends on context, framing.
Yeah, it's interesting. think we can get pretty tangled up in these definitions. And sometimes it doesn't really matter. I mean, things are what they are. But, yeah. Anybody else? Let's see any. It's amazing that you all are here, actually. It's just because there's so much going on out in the
This is
world.
the only place to be.
Upstate Art Weekend is nuts. There's just so many venues that you chose to come to. It's really wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh, there's a hand.
Just sitting here and the melancholy does really, it's hitting me hard. And
Thank you, Stuart.
we've all got our own sources of it as well. But particularly right now, it seems, in the world, it's just hitting us all so hard right now. And it's just like really nice, even though it's really sad. It's nice because there is the good as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important for some. I suppose I bring everything to something. You know, I don't just bring one part of me, and I think that I try anyway to. Yes, I have melancholy and sort of mountains of sadness from various reasons, but I'm also incredibly positive, and I think the making is just in general art. In general, is the most positive thing that you can do with negative feelings. And so there's always the celebration within the mourning, there's celebration within celebration, there's also mourning. So it's,
And the
it's
humour.
and yeah, that's, yeah.
And there's lots of humour.
There is, yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.